I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at housefarms.com.
Well, I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the House Parks radio program, Mega Worldwide, now with 100% more Johnny Million and our dear friend Philip Ittner, who's live in Ukraine. And that's, I like the live part, live and living. And so it's first of all, welcome. How you doing? Right out of the gate.
Good.
Hello.
Fine. About 3 hours, not 4. About 3 hours of air raid sirens today. So diminishing.
Do you ever wake up hearing one and like reach for the alarm clock and try to snooze it by accident? You ever just start slapping?
No, but you know what is kind of funny is I sleep with my helmet now.
That's always been
Just
true,
so
though. Let's be
so it's like
completely frank.
ready, but
Right.
hey.
Yeah,
But no, I've got it ready to hand.
Yeah.
So just in case something happens, I can throw that on. And
I think
flak
that's
jacket
wise.
really isn't gonna. Flak jacket isn't really gonna help you if you get hit with you if the building gets hit. But keeping the old brain pan safe is pretty important.
Very important, yeah. We're glad your brain pan is intact. Before the break, you heard a little bit of it, but I was talking about the U.S. dollar and the issue that's going forward, and people going, we're spending $40 billion, and we've had in Ukraine, and we've had this money printer turned on for whatever. I'd like to be abundantly
Land
clear.
lease.
Yeah, right.
Land lease.
Right. Yeah, we're going to get paid back by Ukraine with interest for everything that they've got.
With interest.
Didn't England just
The Brits,
finish?
The Brits only paid off their World War II land lease debt to us, I want to say 6 years ago, within the last 6 years, something like that.
Exactly.
It was a moneymaker. It was a moneymaker for us.
It was just like 2008.
And we got back. We got back everything that we gave to Britain to defend democracy.
Right. Yeah.
If that's not enough for you, we got
made
our money back.
We made a profit on defending democracy. What could be more American? But also, the same thing happened in 2008. All the loans, even with the ones that failed, the ones that succeeded and were paid back early and had penalties for being paid back early because a lot of the banks wanted to get out from under the U.S. controls. The Fed made money on it. Like they made money on the investments and stuff coming and the bailouts themselves. So,
and when this country is not saddled with massive corruption created partly on purpose by the Russians,
right.
Not saddled with living under the thumb of the Russians, not only in terms of corruption, but in terms of their efficiency and what Moscow allowed them to do. And when they cozy up closer to the massive economic powerhouse that is the European Union, not to mention closer ties with the United States, the GDP of Ukraine is going to be enormous.
Yes.
Once, there's going to be a reconstruction period that's also got to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
But at some point, this country will easily rival the GDP of France or Germany. Easily. There's no question in my mind.
I would argue resource-wise, both in oil,
Surpassed.
gas, minerals, and stuff. It will.
Yeah.
You could combine the two because of Germany kind of meeting
military-industrial complex. What a better advertisement for your hardware than a war.
Right.
I'm not being glib about that. I mean, I'm 50% being glib about it, but the other 50% is. I mean, we do it. We sell our weapons in hot zones so that people can see what they can do. So I'm only partly being glib about that. But military-industrial complex, IT is enormous here. Very well-educated and capable people in that sector. Agribusiness, just the sheer size of the place and the things that they will be able to deliver. This is, and I've said it before. I think part of the reason why the Germans were a little bit reluctant to jump in and support Ukraine, and this is only my personal opinion, and knowing the history of Ukraine and broader relations within Europe, a lot of people have been very scared of a united, powerful Ukraine. It is an enormous country when it comes to European standards. And it's going to give both Germany and France a run for its money within the European Union. And even if the Brits do come back into the EU, it's still going to be one of the most powerful nations on the continent.
Agreed.
Hands down. So we're going to get our money back just fine.
Yeah. It's and it's fascinating to me that it has value even if we didn't. But that is the reassurance for the people who think that
there's also that added extra benefit of defending liberal democracy and shutting down the swelling, the growing threat that is autocracy around the globe.
Exactly.
But, let's put that aside and fixate on money.
Sure. So I'm fascinated by the kind of multiple attempts by the Russians to use nuclear blackmail to stifle, to basically stop the world from pushing back on what they're doing. I have said for a while now that I believe that they view MAD, mutual assured destruction, not as a sort of Mexican standoff, for lack of a better phrase, of like, okay, nobody do anything because we're all pointing at each other. To I can do anything short of pulling this trigger. I can like literally while we're doing this, I can use my other hand to steal what you got. Yeah. I can choke somebody. I can punch somebody. As long as I don't drop my gun, it covers all the other, anything shy of pulling the trigger. You guys just have to let me do it, because if you don't, I'll pull the trigger. And that has been the argument for quite some time, which is not, I would say, a fair place to come from. That is not, suffice to say, a legit argument for that calling something peace.
No, I'm chuckling because I'm remembering there's a wonderful Saturday Night Live skit with Steve Martin where it's back in the olden days of football, the very turn of the century kind of leather helmets and all the rest of it.
Right.
And it's a fake documentary, and they're talking about the most dangerous quarterback on the field was the Steve Martin character because they called him Jimmy the Gun McKirk or whatever it was. Well, in one part because he had a heck of a throwing arm, and the second was because he brought a revolver onto the field and dared the linemen, rush me, I dare you, rush me. Who's gonna
Right.
And it's the same thing. If we let the Russians, not because Russia isn't just Putin, if we let the Russians intimidate us into abandoning a country that so clearly wants to break free from autocracy and join the family of liberal democracy nations, then what happens when they chuck out, when they create a Russian supporting party in Estonia and subvert the government there and install their own puppet government, which down the road, does a false vote like they do so many times, and suddenly we lost Estonia. Are we just gonna? And then they say, don't do anything about it. We've got nukes.
Right.
It's a bully. It's the bully thing. It's the bully thing. Unless you stand up to a bully, he's just going to keep bullying you.
Agreed.
And that's exactly what they're doing. And they're really counting on it because they know they're losing in the field. And it's the only thing they've got going for them, short of losing this war. And losing this war is going to be a really damaging, humiliating thing. Not only just humiliating, but it's going to be really damaging to Russia. But it sounds so schoolyard stuff. But you started it. You started it.
Well, that's I see a lot of that on the Telegram channels that I follow around, the Russian-Ukrainian channels, both pro and against and stuff, just to watch their kind of language. And interestingly enough, the Russian one is full of sort of signed off on propaganda language, Nazism, Satanism, woke West, blah, blah, blah. And then from the Ukrainian side, it's about the strength of the people. They're fighting for their freedom, and you should have never set foot on my land, which is interesting to me that the right doesn't seem to be more in line with that, because it seems like a international version of castle doctrine that they could sort of grasp, right?
States' rights.
You'd think, right?
Just happens to be
Right. Well, it's interesting that they're saying why are we worried about a border over there when we're not worried about our own border? Well, first of all, we are, and we have an entire system set up. It needs to be funded better, and they're the ones standing in between that. But on the other hand, why do you care so much? Why is our border the only one that matters? Do you not recognize that if borders across Europe, for example, start falling apart, where do you think everybody runs in that particular case? They run to the one country that only has 2 borders. Us.
Yeah.
That's
well, and also we're so integrated with the European Union to think that what happens here won't have an effect on us back in the States is 19th century thinking, literally 19th century, not even 20th century, because even we recognized, as horrible as World War I and II were, that eventually we had to get pulled in because what happens here down the road will affect what happens domestically in the United States. And I think that's 100% true.
Exactly.
We talk about the growth of autocracy. We talk about Autocracy Inc., this kind of network of autocracies that seem to be trying to subvert liberal democracies and kind of assist one another, where it's the DPRK or Iran or even Hungary to a certain extent being drawn into that. You think that's going to stop at any time soon, or do we have to finally draw a line in the sand and say, no, Ukraine wants to be a liberal democracy. Ukraine has the capacity to be a liberal democracy. It's not going to take as much work as, say, Iraq would have been or Afghanistan would have been. And I don't want to fixate on those, but we could pick another country. But the point is, Ukraine is able and willing and has it within itself to really fast track getting into a solid democracy. And are we just going to say, no, it's too much trouble and let them fall to Putin's threats and belligerency? And then it's just going to spread further and further and further. No, it has to be stopped here.
When you're a predatory capitalist, like the Republicans like to see themselves as, take that as a pride point. It is the effect of like the Trump kids going to kill animals that are either staked or fenced in. That if you have a country that's on its heels, it is easier to be a predatory capitalist in that area because they don't have any recourse. They can't fight back because they're under somebody else's thumb. But if they can stand on their own, you have to negotiate with them in good faith. And none of them are good at that. That takes real business acumen. That takes genuine art of the deal mentality as opposed to the stuff that's in that book. So we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Don't forget, infotainmentwars.com or twitch.tv/HalSparks. If you subscribe, it helps us out. We'll be back.
There it is.
Jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
The House Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm trying to think if it's the song Synchronicity, but there's one of the big Police hits. The guitar is so out of tune. I find it maddening. And you can only, it's a lot of individual strings picking and it sounds fine. And then when they play a chord, you're like, they're out of tune with each other, but they didn't fix it. And it drives me mad. And it sounds so much like that guitar chord sample that Devin put in that I can only think of like Police songs when that happens. Now, Philip Ittner's with us. Philip Ittner is on Twitter at Philip Ittner, 1 L, 2 T's. Even in the Muskpocalypse, we're still on Twitter. Oh dear. Oh, the wailing and the gnashing of teeth. What shall we ever do now that Elon Musk, the guy behind SpaceX and Tesla, is now in charge of Twitter and has decided to invest in something as a Dogecoin filtration system, apparently. By the way, that's the way this is going. I'm going to let everybody know. That's why he did it. You're going to buy and sell items on Twitter, and the currency will be Doge because he's heavily invested in it, and then he's going to get some sort of big SEC violation, and that'll be that. So I go through this list all the time just to keep up with this, and I want to share this with you, Philip Ittner, with our listeners. So far, as of October 29th, this is the list of losses from the Russian army in Ukraine. 70,250 troops, 2,659 tanks, 5,401 armored personnel vehicles, 1,708 artillery units, 380 MLRSs, 195 anti-aircraft warfare weapons, 273 planes, 252 helicopters, 16 boats, including the Moskva, 1,406 UAVs, 152 special equipments, which is just like anything from tow trucks to buses, whatever they use to move people around. They're borrowing school buses to bring troops in. I think that would be included in special. 4,107 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 351 cruise missiles have been shot out of the sky. Imagine if those had reached their targets, by the way. And this is, by the way, this is from the Kiev Independent, where in the beginning, many people thought that the Kiev Independent and the Ukrainians were overcounting the numbers. They are now, because they're winning so handily in a lot of these areas, they are undercounting. They are being more cautious with their numbers. The numbers that the Russians come for, if you watch any of the Telegram channels where they list it from the Russians, the numbers the Russians are coming up are slightly higher in all categories. There's like 8 more airplanes and 10 more helicopters and 3,000 more dead troops and God knows how many casualties because they don't care. So this is, and again, the Russians lost, the U.S. lost 4,500 troops in 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Russians lost, I want to say, somewhere between 12 and 14,000 in 10 years in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 7 months.
Yeah.
Like 9 months since full articulation. Like they rolled in, and then basically a month later, that's when the Ukrainians were able to full on push back in a major way. And the worm turned
and we can all
in
see
April.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, we can all see it. We can see the advances the Ukrainians are making. We can see the Russian military surrendering and abandoning positions and tanks. I mean, the Ukrainians have more tanks now than when they started the war.
What the hell? Right.
That they captured from the Russians. And I mean, of course, they received a lot more tanks and stuff from NATO member states that had Soviet-style, Russian-style weaponry that they then transferred to Ukraine. So you get a boost there. But, I mean, even before the massive number, because do you remember the period of this war where they were like, no, don't send armor. We can send defensive stuff. We can send artillery, but don't send tanks. Don't send planes. That'll be too provocative.
Right.
Yeah, only send defensive stuff. And they were still building up their numbers of tanks. So a lot of that comes from them actually capturing surrendered tanks because the Russians just run. Well, they don't have it in them. They're poorly led, poorly supplied, and
they're
all the rest of it. And that was their and that was before the Ukrainians destroyed their frontline, first-rate soldiers. Now they're dealing with these guys who have been drawn up by their mobilization, or they're facing Wagner Group guys, or Kadyrov guys, and there's just they're going into a meat grinder. The Russians are just. It's like when it's one of those situations, I think, for the Russians where it's a money pit. It's a chasing bad money with good. They're just doubling down and doubling down and they're doubling down because they don't know what else to do, short of chucking a nuke, which would be devastating for them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they use a nuke and it's done.
Yes,
they use a nuke and NATO is in here directly involved in this fight, and nobody in the world is going to say boo about it,
Right.
because you'll have,
Well, the Chinese, I will say the
100,000
biggest thing is
dead Ukrainians.
the Chinese are out and the Iranians are out the minute that happens, because Iran knows that Israel is not afraid to strike them. And if they're in with somebody who did a nuclear strike and they stand with somebody who did a nuclear strike, Israel will use that as a reason to say the regime of Iran will do nuclear strikes, and therefore we're just going to pelt them out of self-defense, because obviously they're okay with this going forward. And that'll happen in an evening. The Chinese cannot afford right now anything, but they certainly can't afford to be siding with when they need the West to supply them with food and energy until, like, for the next 35 years. They have to do some kind of business until they get on their feet or arrest their declining population. They cannot side with Russia in that attack. If they do that, then the United States will say, well, they sided with the Russians, and therefore Taiwan is definitely in danger. Therefore, we're just going to circle the place with nuclear submarines till the cows come home. And they know that. They can't stand with it. Yeah. So suddenly Russia is alone the second they do that. And they're allegedly, and this is the crazy part, bombing territory that's supposedly theirs and full of their people who wish to be free of the Ukrainian,
argument.
Of Kiev, and like, it's just goofy.
Being forced to go to gay pride marches and all the rest of it. Those poor Ukrainians, let's nuke them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was U.S. General Ben Hodges recently, when he was, because I tell you what, trust me, Hal, this is a topic of conversation with anybody and everybody that I talk to. One of the first questions they ask is nukes. Mm-hmm. And Hodges made the point, and Hodges was commanding general of NATO armed forces in Europe. I mean, he's second, after the commander of all NATO forces in Europe. He was the guy. Yeah. And he made the point, when all this conversation about nukes being used, he said, as a general, especially as a land-based general, I had a whole bunch of different tools in my toolbox. Mm-hmm. And one tool was a screwdriver, and it could be, it was good on screws, but not very good with nails, so you needed a hammer to take care of the nails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my nuclear tool, I have to be very close, because I fumbled nuclear once last time we chatted, and everybody jumped on me. Anyhow, Hodges said the one thing that the tool in my toolbox that was nuclear weapons was deterrence. That's it. That's the only. If I've used it, then I have misused the tool that I have been given, and to use it for anything other than deterrence was a misuse of my tool, and it basically is now an ineffectual tool. Once that bell has been rung, you can't unring it. It's only good for deterrence, and the Russians have been using it for deterrence. We're deathly afraid of them nuking a town in Ukraine, or anywhere else for that matter. But they know it just as well as anybody else. That once you do it, you're done. That's it. It's you cross that. You cross that line, and you can't walk it back.
Yeah, there's no situation. We got to take a break, but when there's no situation where normalization with the rest of the world happens after that fact, especially when you do it in, you invaded, you started losing, you decided to nuke territory you said you were freeing. Like, none of it makes any sense, and there's no situation where, all right, maybe Intel will make a deal with them in, like, next year to open a factory so your people can work, and maybe we'll send farm equipment to help you out. All of that vanishes in an afternoon. And that is more devastating than even us striking back, because ultimately we catch the wind from any kind of nuclear, massive nuclear exchange. But the end of normalized relationships forever happen until a complete turnover in regime and everything. And that, even then, people are like, I don't trust it. We're going to need 2 generations of people before I'm going to trust those guys again. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide, on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
As Gen Xers, all 3 of us have been talking about the end of the world since we were toddlers. and because it's always been on its way. And we've been through the nuclear scare multiple times over our lifetimes. Many of us learned to hide under our desk, the old-fashioned metal ones with the wooden tops. Which, if you don't know, in case of a nuclear war, the desk is designed to melt all around you, and the top of it turns into a little handle, and it basically becomes an urn. And that's why they have you hide under your desk. Little did you know. But so the idea that they're going to use a tactical nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb, or even talking about a dirty bomb, that idea, there's been a back and forth about the Russians telegraph what they're going to do by accusing someone else of planning it, so that if it happens, there'll be enough suspicion in their own 50-cent army, the trolls that are there that are paid 50 cents a jab on social media and the like, or they're paid influencers, or they're paid journalists who will well, yeah, but really, who really did this? Because they were saying this was going to happen, and so of course this is the perfect time for them to hide, that kind of stuff. So one of the things that happened was this. Remember the Doomsday sub that disappeared? The Belgorod, this super sub that everybody's like, it disappeared from its port, and nobody knows where it is, and this thing can park right off of Washington, D.C. and just sit there. And oh God, and it's got bus-sized nuclear missiles, which I'm sure no one will see.
When was this?
This was October 2nd.
Yeah, I want to say
1st, October 1st. Something like that. So it sits in port,
6 weeks
basically.
ago, 5 weeks ago.
Yeah. And basically they just sent it out of port to scare everybody. That was the purpose. They were like, let's just launch the sub and submerge it and make everybody nervous. Well, it was spotted 4 days later, tooling around the Arctic right near its port. Didn't go anywhere. Largely because it can't. That it is so big and so noisy that everybody, because it's not as well constructed as everybody thought, that it literally creaks and all sonar can pick it up. They can't send it into the waters of other countries because its size makes it retch. It goes like the pressure. It's one of the noisiest submarines out there, and it's supposed to be their secret tactical weapon. And it's been spotted, not even submerged. It's tooling around the Arctic above water, which means, do they have pressurization problems? Are they afraid if they submerge it for long that the seals will break and the thing will sink? And then what? Then they've got to explain where, I don't know, 35 to 100, Russian Marine soldiers went all of a sudden. We have to.
That didn't work out too well for Vladimir Putin when the Kursk went down. I was in Russia when the Kursk went down, and it was one of the major failures. I think it was a learning experience for Putin because he faced the wrath of the Russian people because he did not handle that very well.
Right.
And he has, to my mind, never gone and put himself into a situation like that, where he had to actually answer to people who lost their sons and husbands and what have you. So,
right.
There's the Russia's Navy is less than impressive, and that's being diplomatic.
Well, taken on their word, the Moskva sunk itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And the three plumes of smoke that we saw just this morning coming from Sevastopol, obviously that had nothing to do with anything. Although even now the Russians are admitting that it was interesting. We haven't talked about this, but okay. No. So those of you who haven't seen the news, there was a series of explosions at the Black Sea Fleet headquarters on the Crimean Peninsula. One of the primary motivations for them trying to conquer and hold on to Crimea. There you go. Is that that's where their Black Sea Fleet, and they only have 4.5 fleets in total. They even now admit that they were struck, it appears, by a drone, and at least one of their missile frigates were taken out of operation. I think it was a missile frigate. It could have been it could have been a minesweeper. Anyhow, regardless, a frigate-sized ship was struck and is no longer operable. Now, I bring that up for a variety of reasons. One, because it was not believe that the Ukrainians had the capacity to hit that far, even after the bridge, the Kerch Bridge. To hit a military installation like that it was not expected. And secondly, I bring it up because also subsequent to that, the Russians have now said, well, we're not going to abide by the rule of sending grain out of the port of Odessa anymore because you guys struck one of our ships. Which, okay, that's within your right to do, but it just reveals that it never has anything to do with these bigger issues. It has everything to do with punishing the Ukrainians, subjugating this country. If they really cared about the global potential hunger crisis, it wouldn't matter what the Ukrainians hit. They would continue to ship grain to Southeast Asia and to Sub-Saharan Africa.
Look,
but
if Germany was the breadbasket of Europe during the lead up to World War II, and the Allies and everybody, the only reason you would stop grain coming out of Nazi Germany at that time is if it was poisoned, and the Nazis were planning on eliminating anybody who wasn't of German descent with poisoned grain. Because the whole point is you don't want the Germans to be the last people on Earth, right? That was what they wanted. So the same thing with like the Russians. The only reason, if Russia believed any of this crap about Ukraine being full of Nazis, the only reason they would stop the grain going out is because we believe the Nazis in Ukraine are trying to kill everybody on the planet because they are white supremacists.
Or if
Nazis.
if it was really about NATO expansion, then why aren't they pulling their hair out
NATO
about
expanding their waistline with carbohydrates?
Yeah. with two new NATO member states, I don't see them crying much about Finland.
Right.
It's not about anything other than they can't see their colony, their first and most important colony, being wrested out of their control and out of their hands. They cannot comprehend that the world has moved beyond colonialism and imperialism. And they think that they can just grab Ukraine, their first and most important colony, and return it to the fold, because that's what Lenin did. This is a really important, not only in terms of like territory, but and their strategic depth. And people have argued about why Putin has done this. But at the end of the day, I think so much of this is because this is intrinsic to their sense of identity. Ukraine being their sense of empire, their sense of being able to spread their sense of Slavic identity around the world is really important to their sense of identity of self. And so when they lose Ukraine, which they are about to do, they will have nothing else but to look in the mirror. And there are 100 different reasons for why that's happened, but I think that that's an important part of it. And they keep throwing it. They didn't, they tried the denazification thing. There are clearly no Nazis in control of this country. Right. So now they have moved to de-Satanization.
Right. Which is really difficult to do. Anybody who's, if anybody knows a good exterminator, DM me, but for God's sake. So, and by the way, for those who haven't don't know the story that we're talking about in terms of the drone attack, the 9 drones attacked a small fleet of Russian ships, including taking down the one that Philip was talking about. Ukraine has not commented on this, but the Russians have said that British soldiers and the UK were involved in this drone attack, and they are accusing those same people of being in charge of the attack on the Nord Stream now. So, which, by the way,
they're going to do that.
Which, they got to do it with anybody, right? Anybody who attacks Russia must have been the one that did that. And again, I still stick with the idea that they used a pig and blew it up themselves. A pig is a pipeline inspection gauge, gadget, whatever you want to call it. And they loaded it with explosives and they dragged it out there and they blew it up in international waters nearer to, away from their coast because the pipeline is full of gas. The only way to empty it is to vent it back out their way because Germany's not going to do it on their end. And you've got this giant pressurized tube full of gas that if it goes, it blows up your entire pumping station, and the Russian guys who would know how to vent that pipe out and empty it on your side are all being killed in the Donbass right now. They sent all their techs. So what do you do?
And unlike their argument that Ukraine would create a dirty bomb or even nuke itself, how it got a nuke after the Budapest agreement, I don't know.
Right.
But their argument that the Ukrainians would use something on its own territory and then pin it on the Russians, that makes absolutely no strategic point, because the Ukrainians already have the international community on side. Mm-hmm. They don't need to show any more kind of harsh development on the ground here. We've seen Bucha, we've seen Izium, we've seen all the atrocities the Russians have conducted. So there's no motivation for the Ukrainians to do that. However, there's a lot of reasons why the Russians would want to blow the Nord Stream. Not only the fact that it was about to blow up on its own because of the backfill of natural gas, but also because it crosses a Rubicon, so that anybody who even thought of negotiating with the West and using energy and the flow of natural gas as a bargaining chip in negotiations, well, that's gone now too. So that makes strategic interest for those people internally within Russia, whereas the Ukrainians have absolutely no reason to blow up with a nuke their own country. So this false flag sense that the Russians keep throwing around about what they think or what they're telegraphing they think the Ukrainians are going to do really says more about them than it does about the
Also,
Ukrainians.
I think the chances of them actually doing it, they know it's impossible or ridiculous, but the possibility of the Ukrainians doing it, that they float like something like a dirty bomb, then therefore justifies to some degree the mass graves you're seeing, or look who we're fighting against. So even if that exchange never happens, a chemical weapon, a bioweapon, all the things they've been warning about over that Ukraine's going to do to us, or NATO's going to fire into our country, any of that stuff. So therefore, because we feel this threat, even before it happens, we have the right to preemptively murder women and children and bury them in shallow graves around Kharkiv, because look who we're up against. That's, I think, more so than their actual belief that they're going to have this kind of nuclear exchange or do any of this stuff, is it gives them leeway to do anything short of that. Again, the mutual assured destruction as a umbrella, that they're going to attack us. So if we have to shoot their soldiers in the head while their hands are tied behind their back, it's because we're trying to prevent them from hitting us with a nuclear weapon. That's the belief. That's the sales pitch, I think. Less the fact that they're going to come back. Yeah, it's nuts. That said, it's interesting that they're bringing the UK into this right as, Liz Truss, who was, maybe going to dial back support a little bit, steps aside, and Sunak steps in and says, no, we're 100% behind Ukraine. All of a sudden, it's like, well, the UK was in on this. That minor turn never affected it. Let's take a break.
It also comes just as Iranian trainers are in Crimea teaching them how to use drones. So
So that's their way of fake balancing it out. Well, I mean, they're doing it, so we're doing it. It's the whataboutism propaganda attack. When we come back, it's our happy ending. We're going to ask some questions from the chat room that Johnny's been gathering. We'll be back right after this.
I got some.
Excellent. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega World. Stay tuned for the lightning round. We'll be back right after this.
Whether the weather is cloudy or sunny, I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky. Let us get lucky together. Whether the weather is cloudy or breezy, I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. Because isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you? Chugga, chugga, choo, choo, woo, woo. I am smiling, you are smiling. Let us smile together. Whether the weather is cloudy or stormy, I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yay! Welcome back. So we were talking during the break. It is great. We were talking during the break about this Russian mountain base that the Ukrainians have apparently reclaimed. That's like the Red Skulls.
No. The Russians have reclaimed it. The Russians have rebuilt it in Sevastopol.
The Russians,
they'll still be able to have subs at Sevastopol, but their surface fleet will have to pull back, and I think that's a big part of why they did this attack today. And it might have something also to do with the fact that the Battle of Kherson is almost upon us, and they've dug in, and it looks like the Russians are going to put up a fight. They're going to lose that fight, but Kherson is look, just everybody who is listening right now, just be prepared. Kherson is going to be nasty.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough.
Yeah,
and if you left the surface fleet within range of Kherson, even with the ability the Ukrainians have to sink surface ships, it wouldn't be good. But Kherson's about to kick off. Anyhow.
Yeah, agreed.
On that note, questions.
On that, yeah, right. Let's have some questions.
Yeah, my
on that happy note,
is from
it's supposed to be the happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
My first question is from the prof. Ask Phil how much of Ukraine remains undestroyed.
Oh, huge swaths.
Yeah,
huge swaths. The east is in bad shape. I have driven all around kind of Kiev. I've been down south in Odessa, and I haven't gone down to Kherson. I'm toying with getting out to Kharkiv soon. But the conflict zone that's out in the east is not comparable to what's happening in the center or in the west of the country. The Kiev and the surrounding areas took a real beating at the beginning of the war. Odessa continues to fall under attack. Heck, we continue to fall under attack. But by and large, there are huge parts of this country that have gone relatively untouched. I mean, I think about Lviv. I think about Ivano-Frankivsk. These are decent-sized cities, and they haven't fallen under attack in any major sense. So it's partly due to Ukrainian anti-air defense systems, and it's partly to do with the fact that the Russians are crap. Pardon my French.
Well, and they haven't really had to be anything short of that because they've been given a lot of leash for a very long time. In 2014, when they first entered the Crimean Peninsula and all that, in 1997 there was an agreement between Ukraine and Russia that said they could have, I think, something like 25,000 troops in Ukraine or in Crimea, in the Crimean area, around, because they have a military base there and they could move people around and they'd have to coordinate.
Like Guantanamo Bay or like Diego Garcia.
Exactly. And they were supposed to coordinate with the Ukrainians. And then all of a sudden, one day, they just stopped and then they attacked. And then those troops that were hanging out there doing their thing suddenly set up positions and started firing on people. They started, claiming those areas and driving anybody who tried to stop them back with gunfire. And that's, now. And
the Ukrainian Marine forces and the ground forces that were there in Sevastopol wisely said, no, we're going to just leave. We'll lay down our weapons and leave, which is a really smart thing for them to have done in 2014. Because now they can come back with a vengeance.
Exactly. And they're all alive to fight. And because of that, also the Russians underestimated their will to fight going forward. I mean, they've been thinking that I suspect. That this will be the same. So another question real quick.
Yes.
Sure.
Another question.
From Don C. Anything new about Putin's health?
There has been talk that he so there was a photograph taken within the last week in which you could clearly see that his left hand had at one point had a drip or something had been inserted, because you get that reddish black yellowish bruise on the back of your hand. So some folks had said, he's back under treatment, but contrary to that as well is that he does look far healthier. He doesn't swing from all puffy and steroided out to his normal look. Of course, all the accusations that he's got body doubles and all the rest of it. I don't know how much truth there is to that. But no, I have not heard anything reputable suggesting that his health has returned for the worse. It is widely believed that he did have cancer, but that he has survived it and he is in remission. But look, that's the problem with Putin, is that we're not going to know, because he can't let that stuff be known, because not only will that be a threat, incur potential threat from the West in his mind, he's got internally issues that if he suddenly is admittedly sick, the sharks are going to start to circle, even more so than they already are.
Sure.
We got time for another question. We got 5 more minutes, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, let's see. So I've got one from Eric R. Piekarski, what is the reaction on the Sevastopol strike regarding Russian Navy ships damaged/destroyed?
Well, it's a good Polish name, but I think we already answered the question. They're ticked off about it. They're ticked off about it. They're petulant children and now have pulled out of the food shipment agreement that they made, thereby punishing Africa and Southeast Asia for something the Ukrainians did. So, how many questions we got, Johnny?
Okay,
Have we got
by the
another
way,
one?
We got a few more. We got a few more.
Real quick, I just want to mention real quick that there are reports, and I was just looking it up while you were talking about the other thing. There are reports coming out just recently that Putin was on a phone call with Shoigu. He was on a video call, and he had to cut it short because he had a massive coughing fit that would not stop. They literally cut that part short, and so there are increasing concerns that he may have gotten through the worst of one thing, but he's got other stuff going on as well. And hence, that's where the bruise came. They're injecting him with all kinds of like vitamin B and blah, blah, blah to keep his energy up and his health up as best they can. But there you go.
Yeah, and there's a growing fight between Shoigu and the head of the Wagner group. So there is dissension in the ranks, and we'll see if that actually comes to something.
Right.
But
okay, another question real quick.
Sure. Let's see. Julie from Twitch wants to know, how much longer do you estimate this will continue, the conflict?
The war. I have been saying for the last month or so that I thought we were closer to the end of the war than the beginning of it, and I generally stand by that. But there are things that give me pause, and I think it could. So we are 9 months into the war. I think that we are less likely to see another 9 months. But, war's a tricky thing. It could go another 10 months, 11 months. But I don't think so. My gut feeling is that the Russians are going to break. They're going to just, this is so devastating, and there's no chance for them to win. And the Ukrainians just go from strength to strength to strength. We'll see what happens in Kherson. We'll see what happens in the Donbass. But I know somebody who's out there on the front lines currently now, prepping for Kherson. And she openly said, we take Crimea back by the summer. I think that's optimistic. But having said that, the Ukrainians are on the move, and the Russians are doing very little to stop them. It's why they're threatening nukes. I think the Russians are close to collapse, and that could happen. That could happen next week. Frankly, there could be a palace coup. There could be all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's one of the things that triggers. A quicker end to it than even their battle attrition problems.
Yeah. Or potentially a massive escalation. If somebody else worse gets in there and says, let's start sending strategic bombers and just flatten everything, which I don't think is really going to happen. But
that's the equivalent of a tactical nuke.
We can't. Yeah, I mean, it's a Hail Mary move, and it'll ultimately end in defeat no matter what. There's no way the Russians win here. There's just no way. And I don't think there's even any way. There's less and less of a chance that they eke out some sort of advantage in the Donbass. They may come to some negotiated settlement when it comes to Sevastopol, but even that I think is unlikely given everything that they've done in the last 9 months. So. To come back to the original question, this war is not going to last much longer. This war is going to be over it will go into 2023, but I do not know how much it goes into 2023. I would be willing to put hard cash down that it does not go into 2024. This is not going to be this is not going to be a Bosnia. This is not going to be in Afghanistan. The Russians can't sustain it, and the Ukrainians are just getting stronger and stronger. I would say this war is not going to last that much longer. Too much long, much longer than it should, because every day Ukrainians are dying. But You know,
we got to take a break. We're at the end of the show, actually.
We're at the end of the show. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Be safe, Philip Ittner. We love you. At Philip Ittner on Twitter. Follow him. And then, of course, his vlogging from there. And he'll be joining me on the, one of the mornings this week if we can get him in there to talk more about this. Love you, Johnny Million. You're the greatest. And
love you.
And we'll see you guys next time. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And remember, vote. Voting is happening right now. Vote.org.
Vote.
Send a friend, bring a friend. Do the vote. The voting. The vote and vote. Okay, we'll be back.
People are dying here for the vote. Vote.
Yep.